Hi, hello, my name's Adeola, and I hope you'll bear with me because I'm going to read a bit, mostly because I wrote a letter to the architects of Rotterdam. Are there any architects of Rotterdam in the room? I think I recognize quite a few. Raise your hands. Please, higher, proud of yourselves. All right, great. Are there other architects in the room who are not architects of Rotterdam? Great. Okay, so I'm going to modify this slightly. It was originally written to the architects of Rotterdam, but it's for all of you all. Let's call it Architects Working in the Netherlands. I wrote it as part of the exhibition, Letters to the Mayor, that took place not so long ago at Het Nieuwe Institute, the New Institute, the Architecture and Design Museum in Rotterdam. They had adapted a project from a storefront for art and architecture in New York that began in New York about asking architects to write letters to the mayor, advising the mayor on important, I guess, contemporary issues of interest to the city and to architects working in the city. So I got to read all of the letters. They sent me a nice big zip file with all of the letters of all of the architects of Rotterdam. And I came away with one major question. I couldn't understand if architects were citizens of Rotterdam or architects. And I couldn't figure out, they didn't seem to really align these two categories. Architect of the city or citizen of the city. So that led me to the question that I have, and that led me to write a letter back to the architects. So, dear architects, are you a citizen first and an architect second? Are you a designer of the city, as many of the letters describe themselves? Looking to the mayor as a skilled artisan looks to her potential patron. Letter writing is always somehow personal. And who am I to write a letter to you, dear architects? Well, I'm your colleague, your fellow traveler, and fellow lover of cities. I may become a friend or remain a complete stranger. I am, of course, also a critic of your work and an outsider to your profession and to your country. Please listen to the following words with some sense of how we might or might not come to be related to each other, and how my story or stories may or may not connect to you and to Rotterdam. So I go to my favorite place, New York. A few years ago, I did some research about the history of housing in a neighborhood where I used to live in New York, a neighborhood called Harlem. Very different from your Harlem, but related, I think. So, the Harlem Friendship House files at the Schomburg Archives in New York are filled with hundreds of thin, square pieces of paper, now yellowed and translucent with time. Each slip of paper identifies itself simply as information form in slightly uneven capital letters, likely the work of a very worn and old typewriter. The sheets are covered in blue or black ink or pencil, written with different hands. Short notes play out a litany of everyday trouble. Date, October 8th, 1955. Case number 32, premises 66 West 133rd Street. Name, Louis Charlene. Apartment number 4E. Inspection, morning inspection. 1, dining room ceiling falling at time of contact. Hole 5 feet across. 2, plaster of ceiling down in small bedroom toward the kitchen. Half down, other half loose from lathe, about to fall. 3, kitchen ceiling down in front part of room. Hazard. 4, toilet, flush box, inoperative. Have to use pail to flush. 5, electric fixture in bathroom, snapped off. Wire ends bare. 6, rat holes in kitchen, under the sink, table, and radiator. Situation, urgent. As I read through the slips, one after the other, brief and brutal tales unfold. Viola Haywood could not pull the light string in her bathroom for fear of even more of the ceiling would fall, so she bathed in the dark. A volunteer visiting Linnie Hinson's apartment at 453 Lenox Avenue was confronted by a rat eating through the right side of the kitchen cabinet at the baseboard. Rose Artis's window on the first floor opened into the bottom of an air shaft filled with garbage, causing, quote, a concentration of flies and mosquitoes and bad odor in her apartment. Dan McPherson of 490 Lenox Avenue, apartment 2, complained of having been robbed twice due to his unrepaired apartment door. Fannie Freeman's newborn baby died of bronchitis a few weeks after she brought it home to an apartment which remained without heat and hot water, despite her multiple pleading visits to the management office. Between 1952 and 1955, Harlem Friendship House, a lay Catholic community organization, neighbor to most of the complainants for the previous 15 years, collected these slips and stories. During these years, the Friendship House bore witness to the experiences of their neighbors at the hands of a new landlord, the private developer Godfrey Nurse Incorporated. The new private development was part of the project of urban renewal, a 30-year period between the 1940s and 1970s, in which the U.S. Federal Housing Administration sanctioned and funded the dismantling of poor and working-class inner-city neighborhoods, especially black neighborhoods, allowing private developers and city agencies to demolish buildings, seize private property, and forcefully relocate citizens, often using the most brutal of means. For years, the Harlem Friendship House had been headquartered on 135th Street between Lenox and Fifth Avenues, in storefront spaces that kept the workers and volunteers involved in the daily lives of their neighbors. When the new landlord began issuing orders of eviction and demolishing the entire block, the members of Friendship House began visiting the homes and documenting the renters' living conditions. For 4 years, Friendship House gathered information about tenants' rights and helped their neighbors write letters and file complaints with relevant city agencies trying to force landlords to address their tenants' abysmal living conditions. Here is one such letter addressed to the mayor of New York City, typed by volunteers from Friendship House on the behalf of Mrs. Mary Copley, an elderly neighbor facing eviction from her home in Harlem. September 6, 1955, to the Honorable Robert F. Wagner, Mayor of New York City, City Hall, New York, New York. Your Honor, I am a citizen of New York for 48 years, born in the United States. The 23rd of this month, I'll be 70 years old. I live alone, and I have been living in this apartment 24 years. The area that I am living in now has been torn down for projects. The landlord got me 2 or 3 places to move, but on the top floor, and I wasn't able to walk up the stairs. And just because I didn't take them, they sent me an eviction notice to get out by the end of this month, or they will set me in the street. Dear Mayor, Your Honor, I have been looking for an apartment. I cannot find any low-rent apartment. Everything I find is so very high. I am not able to pay the high price. Dear Mayor, will you please let me have 2 or 3 rooms in the low-rent projects? I am on the Social Security and also the welfare. I am a missionary and I live very quiet. I would like to just get someplace here in Harlem near to my church. I have been living in Harlem 48 years. I hope to hear from you by return mail. May God bless you is my prayer. Sincerely yours, Mrs. Mary Copeland, 59 West 133rd Street, New York, New York, 37, New York. Reading through the letters of Rotterdam's architects addressed to Mayor Abu Talib of Rotterdam, I could think only of Mary Copeland's plea. She had such specific needs: 2 or 3 rooms, low rent, near her church, not so many stairs to walk up. Her needs could easily become a clear brief to any architect in New York at that time, or any other time, really. Consider also the tone of Mrs. Copeland's letter, the way she so clearly implores her mayor to hear the details of her case and to respond, the way she establishes her longtime citizenship and residency in New York, the way she addresses him as Your Honor, a formal version of the more colloquial Your Honor, a regular New Yorker's way of calling the mayor. It is clear that Mary Copeland sees herself as a member of her church, a resident of her specific neighborhood, and a citizen of New York. And it is on these grounds that she asks the mayor to hear her case. It is his job to make sure every citizen is housed properly, and as such, she humbly and firmly calls on him to do his job. When I compare Mrs. Copeland's letter to her mayor to the letters of Rotterdam's architects, I'm immediately struck by how most of their letters seem less like a citizen communicating with her elected representative and a steward of her town, and more like the pitch of a skilled artisan looking for work from a patron. So again, I ask, are you architects citizens? Are you architects first? Are you citizens first? These roles indicate different relationships to the city, its ruling classes, and its people, so consider your answer carefully. Here, I note another clear commonality between almost all the architect letters to Mayor Abu Taleb, namely that most of you present yourselves as designers of the city. Positioning yourselves as designers of the city preserves a classical or neutral or innocent role for the architect, which speaks to an anachronistically holistic vision of both the city and design. It gives the impression that architects still have access to some kind of clear, clean perspective on the city, on Rotterdam, for example, and the power to transform it according to their own skill and thoughts. However, we all know, as Anna has so clearly and nicely pointed out for us, that many architects tend to work deeply embedded in spheres of global capitalism for developers and rulers alike. As one Rotterdam architect friend of mine describes it, quote, "I'm doing a shopping mall in China right now. I never go into the city I'm designing. I'm not a citizen of that city." It seems this Rotterdam architect should rather send a letter to the mayor of that Chinese city, no? Or better yet, to the people of that city. And probably this letter should not be written from the grand perspective of designer of the city, as the design directive for this mall was clearly dictated even before the project design. Quote, "Design a space where visitors want to take a selfie." My architect friend continues, quote, "To be a citizen and to be engaged, you need time, and time is scarce in the competitive global architecture business. This architect does not feel like a citizen of Rotterdam, though they have lived there for years, and they no longer feel like a citizen of the city where they grew up. And of course, they are not a citizen of any of the cities in which their buildings are rising. This lack of citizen feeling, a result of the demands of a precarious life working deep in the belly of global capitalism, could be one reason that makes the letters of Rotterdam's architect to Mayor Abu Taleb feel so different to me than the letter of Mrs. Mary Copeland to Mayor Wagner of New York. And now, to return to my very first question, my original question, what does it mean to write a letter to your mayor? Well, in New York, where I come from, it usually means you feel yourself a citizen of the town and you want your mayor to understand that he works for you because you have elected him. There is a long tradition of letter writing to the mayor of New York, and so it is no wonder that the Storefront for Art and Architecture launched this now global letter writing project in that city. However, the relationship of the citizens of Rotterdam to their mayor is not the same, neither formally nor informally, as the relationship of citizens of New York to their mayor. Additionally, the relationship between architects and the cities in which their works rise is not the same as that of citizens to their own cities. This may explain the strange tone that many, not all, of the architect's letters have, as if they were pitches for new work or letters to an audience of fellow global architects, rather than feeling very local, related to the realities of the people of Rotterdam and the conditions in which they live today. In the 1950s, the Harlem Friendship House undertook a huge participatory project, maybe along the lines of what Ed Kim Tan was just talking about, to document the destruction of the homes and lives of their neighbors and to advocate for the better housing of these neighbors. In the process, this group of students, young Catholics, concerned citizens, and friends turned themselves into an organization of expert urbanists, making their own reports on housing conditions and proposing alternative plans for the renewal of their neighborhoods and communicating directly with the mayor and the developers. In the end, almost all of the buildings on their Harlem block were destroyed, demolished, including their own building. It strikes me that Harlem Friendship House acted in ways I imagine you architects might want to learn from if you wish to be better citizens of your town. They stood together with people losing their homes alongside their neighbors and learned how to see what others experience and how to speak to power as friends, as urbanists, as citizens of New York. So I want to thank you for your kind consideration of my critique, extended in the hopes that we might all become better friends to each other and to all the citizens, to all the cities which we love and serve. But before I finish, I just wanted to make one comment on Caroline Kingma's presentation, as I understood it. Caroline spoke about the Tower of Babel, but the Tower of Babel, as I understand it, is about the problem of language. To stop towers, to stop the ambition to build up to the sky, according to the story I read, God gave the people different languages so they could no longer understand each other, and so that ambition to build higher could be stopped. This brings us to the practical problem and talent and gift of translation. I want to take this moment to thank the translators today for doing a difficult and tiring work. This skill, their skill and craft is necessary for us to understand each other, to communicate, to join forces, but not simply to build higher towers, but to build the cities that we really want to live in, all of us together, at least in love and care, even when we are not yet equal. So thank you, sincerely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Adeola Enigbokan.